All right. Thank you guys for coming. I know it's a rainy day. There's a temptation not to come. So, all right. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and get started. Let me just pull up my notes and then we'll pray. All right, let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, we ask that you'd bless our time together. May it be profitable, and may it be a means to exalt your Son, Jesus Christ, in all of our endeavors, in our evangelism, in our outreach. Help us, Lord, to prepare and be ready to be able to have conversations about Christ and not be fearful, trusting in you, being dependent upon you. May this time, may it be helpful. May we be challenged to continue and to, without fear, trusting in you, to talk to people about Jesus and be intentional. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So I did send everyone an email. I didn't get any response. So in your notes, you will see that I just went ahead and made an executive decision. So we will get to it in the notes. So I do recommend, if you don't already own this book, I do recommend you purchase a copy and read it, because we will not be able to go in detail. We're not going to be able to discuss everything in this book. It's just not going to happen. We just don't have enough time. But I will say a lot of my notes are coming from this book. So if you think I'm plagiarizing, I'm not. I'm telling you right now. A lot of my notes come from this book, okay? Or this one, okay? All right, so I try to be very clear. It just wouldn't be helpful if I cite everything in my notes. So just be aware, I'm using Greg Kokel's, I'm using his works. And if you have a Bible, please grab a Bible if you don't. But if you do, let's open our Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Seems like it just was yesterday when we were studying this in our home fellowship groups, right? 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 14 through 21. And just off topic, I do want to preach this one day. This is a text where I've always written an outline like, I want to preach this, but we don't have time to do that, so I'm just going to read it. So 2 Corinthians 5, verses 14 through 21. For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. And he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. From now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him no longer. Verse 17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Verse 20, therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you, on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. We don't have time to dig deep into this text, but I want to make a couple points. Again, this is the Apostle Paul writing to the Corinthian church, but by application, this does apply to us. It does apply to us. And as Christians, we are to be ambassadors for Christ, appealing to people that they would be reconciled to God. But what is an ambassador? Anybody want to take a stab at it? An ambassador? Say that again. A mediator? A representative? That's right. Excellent. That's right. I have here in my notes, a representative acts on behalf of someone. As Christians, we are to represent Christ and act on his behalf. And he's delegated to us the authority to speak and represent him on his behalf. And just as an example, in politics, an ambassador is sent to represent his or her country. Often diplomacy is involved. So when you think of political situations, it's often the case that diplomacy is involved. So we're to be ambassadors for Christ. And as ambassadors, we want to represent Christ with at least 3 essential qualities. And this is taken directly from Greg Koukl's book. The first quality is to have knowledge. Think of it in terms of the mind. An accurately informed mind. We need to know what we believe. So we need to know it, right? So we need to know it. So knowledge. Number 2, we need to have wisdom. An artful method. And in terms of wisdom, we've talked about discernment in the past, right? And that's going to connect with this idea of wisdom. Making good, sound choices, especially in conversations. And then the third characteristic, which is going to be character, right? We're representing Christ. We want to have Christ-like character. We want to be, as best as we can, winsome, to have an attractive manner when we're speaking to somebody. So think of these 3 characteristics, these 3 qualities as we continue this morning as we study tactics. All right. So last month we studied the message of the gospel. But the question that we kind of hinted at that we didn't directly address is how do we have those conversations? How do we get into those gospel conversations? I recommended last month we use gospel tracts, and I brought a whole bunch of gospel tracts. So if you didn't get any last week, got more, and we have a lot out in the foyer. Pastor Rod has stocked us up. And when I was at the Shepherd's Conference, I bought even more, and they're behind the table. So make sure that you stock up. We have plenty, so take some. But gospel tracts, it's a great way to be able to start a conversation and move it from a natural to a supernatural, to a spiritual conversation. I've also hinted at questions, asking questions. And Greg Koukl, in his book, he thinks that what is missing in our conversations is a piece to bridge the content to the conversation. So the content to the conversation. He argues what is missing and needed in our conversations are tactics. Now, tactics help a person control and guide a constructive conversation. So that's important. It allows you to remain in the driver's seat. If you think of it in terms of, you're in control of the car. Well, in a conversation, when you're asking questions, you're the one that's in control of the conversation. You're guiding it. And so you can't get hijacked because you're the one that's in control of it. So tactics help you do that. Stay in control. Now, how is that? By asking lots of questions and making fewer statements, you can navigate in a conversation and control it. Koukl, and here's something that we may want to discuss more. Koukl suggests that we revise our goals for our conversations about Christ. Instead of trying to close the deal, we may try to put a stone in a person's shoe. So having a conversation about spiritual things, it's not necessarily we're trying to get them to pray. Instead, we're getting them to think. And Lord willing, God would use that to change their heart and to bring them to a knowledge of saving faith. We'll talk about that more, but it's having conversations about spiritual things that may prompt a person to critically doubt their non-Christian beliefs. And as a side note, by making them doubt their non-Christian beliefs, what you're doing is you're making the plausibility and the validity and the desirability of the Christian worldview, you're painting a picture, making it more plausible, seeing the validity of the Christian worldview, seeing it as beautiful, and seeing it as in fact desirable, right? And that's something that we do want to do, but ultimately we're not coming at this neutral. We believe it's true. It's not simply that it's possible, but we believe that it is in fact true. So we do want to approach it that way. So what I want to say about what Kokol says is, I want to say this. Even though what he says is helpful, nevertheless, we must not abdicate or neglect opportunities to proclaim the gospel. In Kokol's book, I get the feeling like he is putting the pressure off of us to evangelize, and I understand that. We don't want to be legalistic about evangelism, but at the same time, I don't want us to get in this comfort zone where we don't have any responsibility to preach the gospel. We do. We do. And so if we have the opportunity, why not take it, right? Whereas he kind of makes it feel, when I was reading his book, I felt like he was saying that he was putting people in two categories. He was saying, on the one hand, you're either a gardener, or you're a harvester, right? And I would say we're both. We're not one or the other. I think all of us are both. In some ways, when we're having conversations, we may gardening, like pruning, taking away obstacles from the gospel. Okay, we do that. Whether we know it or not, oftentimes we do. Or we actually may give them obstacles indirectly. And that may be true. And God can get past those, right? But we're also harvesters. In other words, we should, when we can, be willing to have conversations about the gospel and explain the gospel. Does that mean that we're trying to close the deal, though? No. I agree with Kokol. We shouldn't think of evangelism as trying to close the deal like a used car salesman. That's not what we're doing. We're just being faithful to explain the gospel. And that's what we want to do. But tactics are going to help us navigate conversations and, Lord willing, give us confidence and hopefully make us no longer feel fearful because we're in control. That's one of the reasons why we're scared is we're not in control of the conversation, but tactics help us remain in control. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. So if you're still in 2 Corinthians, if you just go over a couple chapters. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. So 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. And I will read it in a second. Second Corinthians chapter 10, 3 through 5. The Apostle Paul writes, "For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds." Let me repeat that. Verse 4. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of Christ and take every thought captive to obey Christ. We are going to talk about apologetics soon. That's not what we're discussing here, but tactics may help us destroy arguments. And that's going to be vital because we do want to destroy false teaching if we can. By God's grace, we would have the opportunity and the ability to do that. And hopefully this will equip us to be able to take the steps to refute and destroy arguments that raise themselves against Christ. But I don't want you to think of this as just a logical issue. This is an ethical issue, okay? This is an ethical issue. Because the unbelievers, those that are non-Christians, they're blinded by Satan. We've discussed that already. And this is the heart issue. Let's look at Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, verses 20 through 23. And this is also applicable in parenting as well. When we are dealing, for those of us that are married that have children, or those of us that are considering marriage and want to have children, if you want to have children or you have children, this is also important. So, Mark chapter 7, verses 20 through 23. Our Lord Jesus, he says, "What comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of a man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." So I bring all this up because we don't want to just talk about surface level stuff. Like when we're talking to someone, typically people think of, in evangelism, we talk about homosexuality or we talk about a specific sin, a behavior, right? But we need to do more. We want to address the heart, right? We don't want to just talk about the behavior. We want to address the heart. We want to address the core beliefs rather than merely discuss behavior. And often, questions can get to the heart. Often questions can get to the heart. And this is applicable in our evangelism, and this is also applicable in our parenting. We want to address the heart, because that's where the behavior flows from the heart. And we want to address that, and we want to pray that the Lord would use our conversations to make the words effectual and change the heart. So, definition of tactics. Tactics involve the details of engagement, while strategy involves the big picture. So typically we think of strategy and tactics, we think of them often synonymously, but Kokol separates them and he distinguishes them. One is going to be small picture, and the other one's going to be big picture. And we're going to be focusing on the little picture, the small picture, dealing with tactics. So tactics are not tricks, slick ruses, word games, or clever ploys. Nor are tactics intended to belittle or humiliate non-Christians. If those of you have ever studied philosophy, many of you guys know who Socrates is. Socrates was known for doing this, just asking questions, and then people would end up looking like fools. Because he would ask them the right questions, and then he would basically... Think of it this way. When you ask people enough questions, they will give you words to hang themselves. And that's what Socrates would do. He would just ask questions, and then eventually the person that he would be talking to would hang themselves with their own words. It wasn't a slick trick. It was just showing the logical inconsistency of the individual. And often we think of this in terms of a dialectic, having a conversation with the end of reaching towards truth. So what is the purpose? It is dialectic. Go ahead.
Are you saying what Socrates did is something we should do or shouldn't do?
What we're going to be talking about is something similar to what he did. Okay. So, purpose. The purpose of tactics, tactics are clever ways to maneuver, to get a footing or an appropriate advantage in a conversation. Tactics help control a conversation and exploit bad thinking to guide a person to the truth. So that's the way, in a nutshell, what tactics are intended to do. And we're going to go through examples. Now, nobody responded to my email, so here is capital letter C is going to be something that we can briefly discuss. There's actually an approach that takes this tactical approach in evangelism, right? And we discussed it briefly last month. We talked about Way of the Master, and we talked about that strategy. Now, the benefit of that strategy is it is tactical. So it's asking questions, navigating a conversation with questions. And what's so great about it is when you're basically guiding the person to admit his sin and need of the Savior. So I don't know if you've ever watched Ray Comfort. Yeah, if you haven't watched any Ray Comfort videos, I recommend just watch some, because you'll see him guide someone through just some questions, and I listed all the questions on your outline. He'll guide them through these questions, and then all of a sudden you see the light bulb turns on, and they see it. They see it. They see their sin and need of the Savior. So how does it work? As I've already explained, you just ask a person questions, and you guide them to truth with questions. In Way of the Master, they use just 4 questions. Would you consider yourself a good person? 100%. Okay, maybe not 100. 90% of the time, people say yes, I'm a good person. 90%. And then the second question is, if God judges you, second question, do you think you have kept the 10 Commandments? Most people are going to say, I don't know. Or yes. Going to say, I don't know, or yes. Say, okay, well, let's walk through a few of them. And then Ray Comfort, in Ray Comfort style, he asks them, have you ever told a lie? And they'll say yes. And then he'll ask them, what does that make you? And then they'll say, I don't know. And they'll say, come on, what does it make you? If I tell a lie, what would you call me? A liar. Okay, so you're a liar. And then he would just walk through. Have you ever stolen anything? Yes. What does that make you? A thief. So he'll walk through a couple of the 10 Commandments and get them to admit that they have committed those sins and label them. That's very important. Get them to label them so they realize what it is. Go ahead.
It's easier if you ask them, what do you call someone who steals or lies?
Yeah.
If you say, what does that make you? They'll be hesitant on that one.
You can do both. And actually, I would try and do both in those situations, because I actually want them to admit it, right? But yeah, indirectly you can do it just like you said, and he does that. And then the next question is, if God judged you by that standard, by the 10 Commandments, would you be innocent or guilty? They're realizing their guilt, right? And then the last question, do you think you would go to heaven or hell since you've admitted your guilt? By your own admission, you're a liar and a thief. So you'd be guilty, and so should God send you to heaven or should he send you to hell? Right? Notice I'm just asking questions. By asking them questions, you can guide someone through the gospel. And that's why Way of the Master is so effective. And very few evangelism strategies has that ability to do that, to navigate, to know where you're going in the conversation, and then also to get them to admit their guilt and need of the Savior. And that's why we went over this particular strategy last month, because it is one that I would recommend using. So because of time constraints, I won't go any more detail, but if you want to dig deeper into the Way of the Master strategy, this book has a great, it's 10 pages in it. I can send it to you. I actually already have it in a PDF. I could just send it to you. I'll email it to everybody in the class so you can look through that more. And if you want to go more detail, we can have another class just focused on a specific strategy, okay? If you guys want to do that. Nobody responded to my email, so here is the pitch to give you an opportunity to connect with me so that we can make that happen. All right, but no worries. I know everyone's busy, so it's okay. It's okay. So capital letter D, conversation tactics. This is going to be the meat of our discussion. And again, sales pitch. Get the book. We're not going to be able to go as deep as I'd like to. So get the book. So tactics. The first tactic, and this is going to be the main tactic that if you guys are going to leave and walk out of this door, this is the one tactic I want you to remember. Okay? It's what Coco terms this, or he labels it, the Colombo Tactic. And if any one of you know about Colombo, it's a show, it's a mystery crime show in the 70s. And if you haven't seen Colombo, It's on, you guys can stream it for free, I'm sure. But watch it. Columbo is known, it's a man, the character, he wears a dress coat. He looks like he just got out of bed, right? His hair's all messy. He looks like he couldn't take care of himself, right? He gets out of bed, and he's a detective. And what he's known for is just, he would go to the crime scene, ask tons of questions, and eventually he will meet the criminal, the actual person that committed the crime, and he'll ask the criminal questions. And you think, he's just being very inquisitive. That's all he is. He's just very inquisitive, very unique, very eccentric, right? He asks tons and tons of questions. And eventually you think, okay, the criminal is going to get away with it. But then Columbo asks more questions, and near the end, he'll just stand there. He'll always ask. He always asks for someone for a pencil. Or a pen. He doesn't have one. He's always bumming one off someone. But in the end of the episodes, he'll ask one question, and he'll say, you know what? There's something that's bothering me that I don't understand. Could you answer this one last question? He's already asked him so many questions, like much like an attorney asking someone on the stand. He asks one more question, and usually that one question unravels the case and makes the guy, it shows the guy guilty. And the guy sees that he's guilty by that one question. And that's because Columbo is skilled with tactics. He knows the type of questions he should ask, and he knows how to unravel the way, like I said earlier, oftentimes people will give enough rope to hang themselves, and that's what Columbo would exploit. The person would keep talking and keep talking and keep talking, and eventually they would expose that they're the ones that committed the crime, just by asking questions. And in a sense, we want to be able to develop that not only strategy, but that intention to ask questions, ask people questions, and be intentional and strategic about what we ask. So the Columbo Tactic, what is this tactic? It's named in honor of Columbo, and it's asking questions carefully formulated to gather information and bring clarity by obtaining definitions to terms within a conversation. That's very important. The person that you're speaking to may have a different dictionary than you, so you want them to define their terms. In any debate or conversation, you want someone to define what they mean. If they say, I believe in Jesus, you need to find out what Jesus they believe in. If they say that I go to church, you need to find out what church do they go to. If they say that I'm a Christian, you need to find out what do they mean by that, right? You want to ask questions. And you think of this as like in the army, when you go scout and you go on you basically go for, you go there to gain information. That's kind of what you're doing in the conversation. You're trying to find out where they're coming from. So asking lots of questions can give you intel, to give you what they believe, and that's going to be important. So there are 3 steps to this tactic. The first step is to reverse the burden of proof. Reverse the burden of proof. Remember this. The person that makes a claim has the burden or responsibility to defend his claim. Did you catch that? So if someone makes a claim, they have the burden to defend that claim and to be able to defend its truth. So they have the burden of proof. If they make a claim, they have to defend it. They have to provide evidence. That's why if you're asking questions, you have no burden of proof. You're not making any claims. You're just asking them questions. You're just trying to find out what they believe. You're not saying what you believe, so you don't have to defend what you believe because you haven't told them. Right? That's what you want to do, is you want to reverse the burden of proof. You want them to be in the dock. Right? We don't typically think of like that in our court, but you want them to be on the stand. They're the ones that are being interrogated, not you. You don't have a burden of proof, they do, because they're the one that's on the stand. They're the ones that has to answer the questions, not you, because you're not the one that's being asked.
So it's more or less the reverse
Yeah, yep, it is. So asking questions allows you to stay in control of the conversation, and you don't have to shoulder the burden of proof. You don't have to prove anything. They do. So that's being tactical, right? It seems like, man, that seems messed up. Well, we have to defend what we believe too, but in this tactic, we are able to remain in control and have them have the burden of proof. The second step in the tactic, so number 2, is learn what they believe and why they believe it. So we're gaining information, we're asking questions, finding out what they believe, and then also finding out why they believe it. And then the third step, which is going to be the hardest to practice, is when appropriate, we're going to exploit flaws in bad reasoning. So that's going to be where we actually use questions to show that they are hanging themselves, right? That they are basically destroying their own viewpoint by what they're telling you, right? And that's going to take more practice. And we'll talk about that. But here are the 2 questions, the model questions to be able to ask to use this tactic. And these are model questions. That means you can change it, you can use it differently, but you want it to have the essence of this model question. So the first model question is this: what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? So when someone tells you something, they say, you know what? I'm a Christian. What do you mean by that? What do you mean? You don't even. What do you mean? That's the question. Or you could say, what? Could you tell me more? You're using it's the same. You're trying to find out what they mean. Define your terms. Tell me what you mean. And that's why, in summary, it's the question what, right? What? And then the second model question is, it has to do with how or why. Just like if you've had children, like right now, my daughter Sophia, she keeps asking me why. And some of the questions are very, like, she's asking me basic stuff, like, why? Why do I need to go to bed? Why? Right? That's what you want to do. You want to have that childlike, being inquisitive, curious. You need to ask why. You need to ask how. So when they tell you something, they say, you know what, I believe, abortion is okay. How did you come to that conclusion? Why do you think that? Why do you think abortion is okay? Right? What I'm doing is trying to find out the reasons for what they believe. Tell me, what is the justification for that? What are the reasons behind what you're telling me you believe? So it's in essence, it's how or why. And these are the 2 questions that are going to be foundational to use the Columbo Tactic. So if you can memorize these questions, you got the Columbo Tactic. And any conversation that you have, you can remain in the driver's seat, stay in control of the conversation, and find out what they believe and why they believe it. That's what's great about this. Now, to get good at this, you need to take the necessary step to do this. Anticipate objections. Reflect on questions you may have asked. Right? Because I don't know about you, sometimes I don't think very quick on my feet. And so it helps, after you have a conversation later, you can analyze, take inventory of what you said, and think about, I could have said this, and if I would have said this, then I would have been able to get more information, or I could have shown that their belief is false, right? So just like someone that does chess thinks about all of the different ways, the different moves, we want to be able to do that too. Think about, if I would have asked this question, I could have been more effective in my discussion with that person in that conversation. Not to beat yourself up. That's not the intent. It's just to think about how I could improve. Okay? So this is just to improve, not to beat yourself up. And practice. Practice. Use these tactics in conversations with your family. Right? I've been doing that with my son. So my son, he's 7, so I'd just be like, what are you thinking right now, son? And he'd be like, yeah, what are you thinking right now? It's just like, what do you mean? And so I just ask him, and he'll just be like, and he'll respond to me. So you can use this with your family, you can use it with your friends, and you can do it with non-Christians.
This is my mistake in teaching this would be like, because he never asks me why anymore. He asks me, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, my son does that too, and I think that comes with age. But still, we want to get our kids to be curious, and so we got to use those tactics on them. So then they're going to start using them too.
Yeah, he reverses the Colombo movie.
Yeah. Now, it may happen that someone will try and use this tactic on you. Okay, there are some atheists out there that use something similar to this. And if someone tries to reverse the burden of proof on you, here's what you can say. You can say, why don't you state your point clearly with your reasons and we can discuss them? So if someone's asking me a question, I could just say, you know what? I'd prefer not to answer the question. Can you just tell me what your point is? And then we could talk about your reasons for we could talk about what you're trying to get at. You see how I just reversed it? So I'm not answering their questions. I basically turned it back on them. So the person says, Ryan, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? I could say, well, I'd love to share what I mean, but before I do, could you please get to the point of what you're getting at? I just reversed the burden of proof on them. So you can reverse it. So hopefully that helps. And if you want more, like I said, get the book because he has more tactics. Now the professor's ploy, I'm going to skip it just because I don't see the need to go through it. But it's just simply this: is that if someone says, you know what, Christianity is false, and or you could fill in the blank, but ultimately what they're going to do is try and make you have the burden of proof. And instead of buying into it, someone says, oh, you're a Christian? Okay, you're a Christian? Go ahead and tell us why Christianity is true, right? Well, if you're a Christian, you haven't told them that you're a Christian yet. What you can do is simply say this: I haven't said, I haven't said anything about what I believe, but why do you think Christianity is false, right? So basically, when someone tells you Christianity is false and you shouldn't believe in Christianity, and then they say, and anybody in the room that's a Christian, if you're a Christian or you're a Christian, why don't you stand up and explain why I'm wrong, right? What they've done is they've put the burden of proof on you. And what you want to do is stand up and say, you know what? Could you tell me why you think Christianity is false? Right? Instead of telling them what you believe, which is, eventually we will have to do that, but instead of telling them what you believe, ask them questions to find out what they believe. You want to keep using your tactics. Why is that? Because if you expose what you believe, you're going to have to shoulder the burden of proof, which we want to do, absolutely, but at this early in the game, we don't want to give them our cards yet, right? Because if you show them your cards, at that point you're going to have to shoulder the burden of proof. But if you haven't showed them your cards, if they don't know what you believe yet, you can keep using your tactics. Get enough information, and then you're at a point where you can be able to hopefully share what you believe and refute what they believe. You have to get. Oftentimes we want to make them lost before they can realize that they need to be saved, right? So that's the professor's ploy. This I didn't really include it because it's not necessarily a tactic that we use. And then number 2, the suicide tactic. This one is very important. This is where you use their words against them. So what is the suicide tactic? You exploit false views that self-destruct. So self-destructive views explicitly or implicitly affirm self-refuting statements or logical contradictions. The primary example of a self-refuting statement is probably this. If I say that, I've refuted myself. Because, if I don't know any English, right, I should say any right here. If I don't know any English, I can't say that, right? So I've refuted myself, right? It takes, because what I'm ultimately doing is I'm contradicting myself. I say, I don't know English to you. I don't know any English. But I'm using English to tell you, right? Or this is going to take some time to figure out how to do this, but what you're doing is you're taking the statement and you're asking, does the statement, is it consistent with itself? If I say, there is no absolute truths. If I say there is no absolute truths, it should be are. There are no absolute truths. Do you guys see the contradiction? I'm making an absolute truth right now. When I make this statement, I'm telling you, it is absolutely true. There are no absolutes. Do you guys see the contradiction? It takes time to see them, but when you start asking yourself, the claim that the person just told me, if I use its own standard, is it going to actually meet its own standard? In other words, is the statement hypocritical? Right? Does it not meet its own standard of what it's saying? In your notes, I put it this way: self-destructive views. These views defeat themselves on their own. All you need to do is point that out. Statements that commit suicide have within them the seeds of their own destruction. And I listed a whole bunch of examples. Let's go through them. There are no absolute truths. What would be the Colombo tactic to ask someone if they said there are no absolute truths? What would I ask them?
You're saying there's no false.
Are you absolutely
Sure about that?
yes, right? Right? Because there are no absolute truths. So it's absolutely true there are no absolutes? Is that what you're saying to me? And then they're going to be like, yeah. And I say, do you realize you're contradicting yourself? Yes. All right. Right? Or how about this one? All statements are false. All statements are false. Well, that includes my statement that I just said. We cannot know anything. So you know that we cannot know anything. We should not listen to people's ideas. So should I not listen to your ideas? Right? We can only know what is verified by the scientific method. Have you verified by the scientific method that we can only know things by the scientific method? No. Okay, then evidently we can know things that are not verified by the scientific method. Do you guys see what I'm doing? I'm taking the statement, the claim, and then I'm basically asking, does the claim, can I use it again? Can I basically, in my mind, I'm asking, in some way, can that statement be both true and false at the same time? In some way, is it true and false at the same time? I'm trying to see if it's contradictory. Sometimes the way that you can do it is just write it down and then ask yourself, if this statement is true, then can it meet its own criteria? Can it meet its own standards? Or is it hypocritical? Does the belief itself betray what it's telling you? All truths are learned by experience. All truths are learned by experience. Have you learned all truths? Have you learned by experience that all truths are learned by experience? No. 2 plus 2 equals 4. I didn't learn that by experience. Mathematics, I didn't learn that by my five senses touching the number 2. That doesn't even make any sense, right? Or how about this one? All religions are equally valid and true. All religions are equally valid and true. So, Christianity says only Christianity is true. So, if all religions are equally valid and true, then only Christianity is true. Do you guys see the contradiction there? Or how about this one? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What extraordinary evidence do you have for that claim? Because what they're saying is, if you have a claim that's about extraordinary, something that's extraordinary, then you have to have extraordinary evidence. Okay? And I would ask the person that makes that claim, what extraordinary evidence do you have to support this? To support that the only way that we can, how can I say this? The only way that we can verify extraordinary claims is with extraordinary evidence. So the only way that we can verify them, because that's what they're saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So I take that and I repeat back to them, if extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, then you need to have extraordinary evidence to show that extraordinary claim. Because that is what they're basically telling you is all extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, they're making a claim about extraordinary claims. So you need to ask them, what extraordinary evidence do you have about that extraordinary claim? You guys following me? Or how about this last one? It is wrong to try and change someone's beliefs. That happens when you're witnessing. Some Christian will come up to you and say, you know what, you shouldn't try and change people's beliefs. Then I ask them, are you trying to change my beliefs? And they'll say yes. Or how about you know what? I'm on a college campus and I'm saying Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And they'll come up to me and they'll say, that's intolerant. And I'll ask them, are you being intolerant? Are you being intolerant right now of my intolerance? And then they're going to say, yes. I say, you realize you're contradicting yourself, right? Or how about, you should always be open-minded. Okay, always be open-minded, right? Well, you got to ask them, are you open-minded to my narrow-mindedness? They're going to say no, and this contradiction. All right, so we've spent enough time having fun with some of these. So to go through, here's our notes. So we are at capital letter D, Barbara, and we're actually under conversation tactics. We're at suicide tactic, which is going to be tactic number 2. Welcome. So there are 3 steps to this tactic. So the 3 steps are identify the claim, and then the second step is consider, does the claim meet its own standards? Can the claim be formulated in the form X is the case and X is not the case at the same time? So ultimately what you're trying to do is see, does it contradict itself? Does it say yes and no at the same time? Does it say true and false at the same time? And then number 3, ask a question to expose the contradiction. So in a nutshell, that is going to be that's going to be a tactic you can use with the Colombo Tactic, which is the suicide tactic. Okay? And if it, like I said, this takes time and practice. You don't immediately see the contradiction. And I do want to give you a caution and a warning. There are some times where something can seem contradictory, but it's not. So I'll give you an example. So, God determines Christians believe the truth. So God has determined that. If you don't like the word determine, you could put the word decreed, planned. Okay, so we've discussed Arminianism. So Arminian brothers are going to say that, they're going to say something like this, that if God determines something, then it's not free. That's what they're going to say. Okay? And as Christians, and for those of you in here, we've discussed Calvinism. We believe that something can be both determined and free at the same time. That's what we believe. And we don't believe it's contradictory when we understand properly what we mean by freedom. Okay? But they're going to say it's contradictory. And I'm going to say, no, it's not, because we need to define this term. Okay? That's why even when someone uses the tactics against us, we need to be ready to determine, or be ready to define our terms. And then also, these two can be true. You can be determined to believe something true. So, if someone says, okay, so you're a Calvinist. Yes, I'm a Calvinist. So are you a Calvinist because God determined it, or are you a Calvinist because you believe it's true? I'm going to say it's both. They're going to say, well, it can't be both, because if it's determined, then it's not free. You didn't freely come to the truth on your own. And I'm going to say, yes, I did. Because this and this need to be defined. And so if you're talking to an Arminian, make them define their terms. And you as a Calvinist need to define your terms. Because you'll find out that we're not contradicting ourselves when we understand properly what we mean. And that's why we got to use this Columbo tactic.
On that point, I heard a Calvinist preacher give a simple, good illustration. You have meat and vegetables in a room. You have a rabbit and a vulture. They are free to eat whichever they want. You can be 100% certain which one they're going to eat, and if God changes the vulture into a rabbit, which I think we should be the vulture, but once God gives us a new nature, then you are free now to eat, but it's just predetermined. The rabbit will never eat the meat.
Excellent. Did everyone catch that? The analogy? I've heard a similar one. I think it was by C.J. Mahaney or somebody. Basically, it was different. It was if you had a lion and a mouse. Or no, it was it was just a lion. If you have a lion and you put lettuce in front of the lion or a piece of meat, you can know with certainty that the lion is going to take the meat. But you have not infringed upon the lion's freedom to choose what they're going to eat. So it's kind of the same idea that freedom and determinism can be together and there's no contradiction. Okay, but I just bring this up because Arminians are going to bring it up and they're going to try and use the Columbo tactic. And so if you use the Columbo tactic back on them, make sure you define your terms, right? And I know this is all high-level stuff, but going back to the tactic, it's going to be helpful to realize that sometimes what we just need to do is just ask more questions. All right, so we're going to go a little over, and I'll try and speed up because next hour I want to actually have us practice. Okay, so we've discussed the suicide tactic. Now we're going on number 3, taking the roof off tactic. This terminology comes from Francis Schaeffer. So if anybody knows who Francis Schaeffer is, he was a theologian and a philosopher, and he had a big impact. He was taught by Cornelius Van Til, and he was known for a book, How Then Shall We Live? But he's the one where this term comes from, taking the roof off. So Kokel just continues to use that terminology. So taking the roof off tactic. It's taking a viewpoint, then you take the viewpoint and you show it logically entails an absurd conclusion. So think of it as this way, putting yourself in the person's shoes. The person tells you that they believe that God doesn't exist. Okay, so for a moment, hypothetically, consider, if God didn't exist, what would that mean? So you start thinking, getting in their head, thinking like them for just with the purpose of showing them what their viewpoint leads to. We place ourselves in our opponent's shoes to show where their views lead. Or we think of it as taking our opponent's views for a test drive to see where it goes. So if someone tells me that, I'll give you an example of this. If someone says, I don't believe in God and I believe in evolution, okay, so then what I'm going to do is hypothetically, okay, if I were an evolutionist, what would that mean? If I didn't believe in God, what would that mean? Well, that would mean, number one, there is no right or wrong. Number two, humans do not have dignity. And number three, that means I could do whatever I want. So then I start saying, okay, so if what you're telling me is true, then I guess I should just punch you right now. And then I'll win the argument. And they're going to be like, what? Yeah, you told me that. If what you're telling me is true, then the way that I win is I just punch you. And they're going to say, no. Oh, so you think truth is important, right? Yes. But if evolution is true, why should truth matter? Right? So what I'm doing is I'm taking their viewpoint, and I'm thinking about what are the consequences of their viewpoint. Does their view have consequences that lead to foolishness, lead to contradictions, leads to absurdity? And if they do, that's what I want to expose to them. I want to show that to them. So there are going to be two, I put two, but there's actually three. There's 3 steps to this tactic. Number one, reduce the view to its basic claim. Find out what exactly are they claiming. And then number 2, consider, does the claim result in a wild contradiction? Or excuse me, sorry. Does this claim result in a wild conclusion? Is it counterintuitive? Does it lead to a contradiction? And then number 3, invite the person to think about the implications of his view if it were true. So, we could think of tons of examples. If someone says that abortion is okay, and there's nothing wrong with abortion, then, you could say, okay, so abortion is okay. Okay, so you can kill a baby in the first trimester. Yes. You can kill a baby in the second. Yes. Why can't you kill a baby when they're 2 years old then? What's the difference? What's the difference then? And then they're going to say, well, they're not outside the womb. Why does location matter? Where the child is, why does that even matter? Right? What I'm doing is I'm trying to show that their views lead to a conclusion that is absurd. Right? Killing a 2-year-old is absurd. That would be murder. Why is there a difference between killing a baby in the womb and killing a 2-year-old? What's the difference, right? So I'm trying to take their view and push it to its logical conclusion and draw that out. And sometimes this takes work. We have to think about what they believe. But sometimes, here's the wonderful thing about the tactics. You don't need to know anything. You just ask them questions. You don't need to know everything. All you need to know is the tactics, and then they'll tell you what they believe, and then you just start asking questions. Oh, okay, so you think abortion is okay. Okay. So is it okay to kill a baby when they're the first trimester? Yeah. How about the second? Yeah. Do you think it's okay to kill a 2-year-old? Because they've become, I can't afford my 2-year-old, man. They're eating all my money, right? I can't afford it. Why isn't that wrong? Why is that not okay, right? I'm just asking them questions, and I'm doing it to show the absurdity of their view, because it's going to lead to that. It's eventually going to lead to that conclusion that there's no difference, because they're starting off with a viewpoint that doesn't presuppose the Christian view. So if we're not made in the image of God, then we're all disposable, and it doesn't matter. Age doesn't matter, right? So we want to show the absurdity of their beliefs. And the way that we do that is by asking them questions. Sometimes, some of you guys may have heard this term, reductio. The full Latin is reductio ad absurdum. I'm not trying to be fancy with Latin, but just think of taking the roof off means reductio, reduce. What you're doing is you're reducing their beliefs. You're reducing them down to a claim and showing that they lead to a absurdity. So you reduce to absurdity. Absurdity means crazy, right? It's mad. That's what you're wanting to do with this tactic. Reduce it to absurdity. So if someone tells you something and you know it's wrong, you just keep asking questions and try to find out what exactly they mean. And then once you find out what they mean, then you can see if that belief is true, then that leads to this absurd conclusion. And if it leads to this absurd conclusion, then that claim must be false. That's the way that you think of the logic. I will tell you, I do this a lot. This is going to help you a lot. When you're talking to people, you just think of really hard. Okay, what are you telling me? Okay, you think that nothing exists. I don't know if you've ever met any Hindus, but Hindus believe in something called Maya, right? So they think that all of reality doesn't exist. And so when you hear that, you're like, okay, so you think nothing exists. Okay, can I have your wallet? What do you mean? Can I have your wallet? Why? Well, if it doesn't exist, so let me have your wallet. And then they're going to be like, what do you mean? I can use the money. It doesn't exist. Give me your wallet. I've actually done that. When I was at Chico State, there was this Hindu, and he was giving out the Bhagavad Gita. And so I was like, would you like a copy of the Bhagavad Gita? And I was like, sure, give it to me. Can I have your wallet too? And he's like, wait, what? Yeah, nothing exists. So give me your wallet. Right? Or how about this? They'll say, you know what? Hindus will say, or no, Buddhists. Buddhists will say, you know what? To reach nirvana, you have to follow the Eightfold Path. So then I'd say, okay, actually, I guess it is Hinduism. So Hinduism, you have to follow the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita to be able to reach moksha, which is like their idea of heaven. Okay, so then I'd say, okay, so if everything is non-existent, then this must be heaven. I'm already in heaven. And they're going to say, no, you're not. Yes, I am. No, you're not. Yes, I am. And then they're going to be like, nothing exists, so I must be in heaven. So I'm just showing them the conclusion of their belief. And it leads to something that is absurd. It leads to something that doesn't make any sense. All right, so we're close to the end. Steamroller tactic. This is something we don't do. We as Christians are not going to do this tactic. So the only reason why we're talking about it is so that you're aware of it and so that you're able to go against it. So you're able to deal with it. So the steamroller tactic, think of a steamroller. You roll something down, flatten it down. A steamroller frequently asks questions and constantly interrupts. These types of people, it's like talking to a brick wall. You can't get a word in. You're talking to them, and all they do is just keep interrupting you. They keep asking questions, and they don't let you get a word in at all. That is a steamroller. That is someone that's trying to hijack the conversation, and they don't want you to talk. So those types of people, how do you deal with that tactic? Number one, you can graciously try and negotiate with them and say, you know what? Hold on. How about this? How about we both agree that we both get a chance to talk? Okay? You've already been talking for 5 minutes and you haven't let me talk at all. How about you give me the chance to talk for 5 minutes and then we will rotate? How does that sound? Does that sound fair? Yes. Okay? That might not work. Negotiations might not work. So then you shame them. You shame them. How do you shame them? You say, you know what? You won't let me get a word in. You know what? You are right now. You are being contentious, and you're not letting me speak. And so I could tell you don't want to actually have a conversation. All you want to do is interrupt. So you know what? If you don't stop interrupting me and let me talk, then I'm not going to talk with you because all you're doing. So basically, you're shaming them, making them feel guilty for continually interrupting you. Right? And then the last one, don't cast pearls before swine. Leave the conversation. If they're not going to let you talk, you're not actually having a conversation. It's a monologue. So walk away. Number 5, the 5th tactic is a Rhodes Scholar tactic. This is just basically you ask for reasons to trust an appealed authority. So someone's going to tell you, I don't know, let me give you an example. How about homosexuality? Homosexuality, people are going to say, homosexuals are born that way. And then they're going to say, you know what? All the scholars, all the evidence says that. And then you're going to say, what scholars and what research have you read? Please tell me that. Because all they've done is they've appealed to authority without actually telling you what the authority is. And then you could say, have you ever read the Bailey study that shows that 50% of, I believe it's fraternal twins, that there's a 50% either one could be gay or gay. That shows that it's not biological. Have you considered that? And then they're going to be like, oh, whoa. He actually told me, he cited a study, and they don't know anything. They're just telling you what they've heard, right? So what you want to do is you want to, number one, ask them, if they appeal to authority, find out exactly what the authority is. If they say studies show, what study? What study are you talking about? Statistics show, what statistics are you talking about? Martin Luther King Jr. says, okay, why should I trust Martin Luther King Jr.? See what I'm saying? I'm trying to, we don't want to say that you can't appeal to authority. Absolutely. But you have to appeal to a competent authority. And you need to ask questions to find out if the authority that they're appealing to is a competent authority. Is it an authority that we should actually listen to? Because oftentimes people are just telling you what they heard. The Bible has tons of contradictions. Show me one, please. Show me one. Right? You see what they're doing? They're telling you something, but they don't know what they're talking about. So you just ask questions to show that they don't know what they're talking about. All right, number 6, just the facts, ma'am tactic. And again, these terms are not me. These come from Greg Kokel. Okay, just the facts, ma'am tactic. Factual claims are to be evaluated. There are 2 steps to this tactic. Number 1, identify the claim. And then number 2, verify the claim is factually accurate. This actually requires homework. If someone tells you some factual claim, you're going to have to actually look it up. And so when that happens, you say, you know what, I've never thought about that. Let me do some additional research and I'll get back to you. People will respect your integrity when you tell them, have intellectual integrity and be humble and tell them, I never heard about that. Let me look into that. And then number 7, inside-out tactic. Exploit views that outwardly deny and affirm the inescapable inward God-given human character and constitution. So this is inspired by Francis Schaeffer, and it's the idea of livability. When someone tells you something, is it livable? Because God has put in our hearts, God has given us a conscience. We know right from wrong. We're made in the image of God. So with the image of God, we're going to still be there are going to be elements of the Christian worldview in our thought processes. But there's also going to be non-Christian elements in our beliefs if we're not a Christian, and they're going to be conflicted. You're going to have beliefs that are God-given that you can't shake, but then there are also going to be these foreign non-Christian beliefs, and they're fighting against each other. And so what Cornelius Van Til talks about them being, there's rationalism and irrationalism. And what you want to do is you want to exploit that. So when you have a Christian talking to a non-Christian, the non-Christian, they're going to have certain beliefs that they're still going to hold on to that they're borrowing from Christianity. And some of those beliefs are going to be near and dear. For example, when you're in a funeral, you are showing human dignity towards the person that died. But for a non-Christian, why would you show dignity? No human has dignity in a non-Christian belief system. And so, by the way that someone acts, they're betraying their non-Christian beliefs. And they're exposing their Christian beliefs, right? So, the person sitting there saying, oh, I'm sorry, they're crying, their mom and dad just died, they're crying, and they're a non-Christian. And you're just sitting there thinking, that is demonstrating that they know that they're made in the image of God. They know that all humans have dignity. And yet, I start talking to them and they say, God doesn't exist. Humans they come from lower animals. They've evolved. But when you start watching the way that they live, they don't live like that. And so you want to expose that. The way that you live, you are living, your beliefs, your non-Christian beliefs betray your behavior. Your behavior, you're acting like a Christian. You're acting like humans have dignity. You're acting like we're made in the image of God. Now, why is that? Well, because God has put that in our hearts, and non-Christians, I think I used the analogy before, but when you're in a swimming pool and you have a volleyball and it's like a person sits on a volleyball and they're trying to keep it down, and that thing just keeps popping up. Well, the same. We're made in the image of God. You could try and push that down as much as you want, but it's going to keep popping up because we're made in the image of God. We know we have knowledge of God innately, and we know right from wrong. And so the non-Christian is going to have to do all of it in their power to push that knowledge down. And what we want to do is ask questions to bring that up. Number 8, what a friend we have in Jesus. Amen. What a friend we have in Jesus. Now this tactic is place the opponent's views against Jesus, not against you whenever you can. So if someone says, we should always be tolerant of everyone's beliefs. That's not what Jesus says. Jesus says we should stand for the truth. And do you know who the truth is? No. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Do you see what I did? I pitted them against Jesus. They told me what they believe, and I took what they believe when I can, right? I can't always do this, but they told me what they believed, and I took their view, and I put it side by side with what Jesus says. Because Jesus always wins in the conversation. And even non-Christians will admit that Jesus was a good teacher. So I'm going to use that to my advantage, but I'm going to make the point that, whatever you believe, it contradicts what Jesus says. I'm going to take Jesus over what you say. And then the 9th tactic, sticks and stones. When someone uses name-calling to deflect, ask for definitions of such vocabulary. You're a bigot! You're a bigot! What do you mean by bigot? Define that, please. You're intolerant. What do you mean by that? Do you see what I've done? They're calling me names. You could even do it with curse words if you really want to, just to get under their skin. You're an idiot. What do you mean by that? I've had people flip me off. You know what I always say to them? You're number 1 too. Now that may not be appropriate to say, okay? And when I pass out gospel tracts, people always say, I'm good. Jesus says you're not. their eyes go, wait, what? So sticks and stones. Ask them to define those bad words that they call you. Bite the bullet. Sometimes we have to admit that some of our views might be hard and might be difficult for people to believe. But if it's true, we have to bite the bullet. I put this myself. This is my own term here, but sometimes we have to bite the bullet. What I mean by that is, if we have a belief that's kind of hard to swallow, we have to admit, that is hard, but we believe it. No getting around it. And we all have beliefs that may be difficult. What are some examples of beliefs that are difficult? I can name a whole bunch of them, but the idea is that, I'll just give you an example. Calvinism is a hard pill to swallow for some people. It is. Okay? And if someone becomes an Arminian, you know what? I believe that's false, but you know what? You're still in the kingdom. And I'll bite the bullet and say, you know what? I know it's hard. I know Calvinism's hard. I remember struggling through it. But I believe it's true, and I bite the bullet. I accept that Calvinism is true, and I accept that it's hard. I guess that's an example. Watch your language. When you're talking to someone, try and not use so many Christian terminology, right? We gotta get away from that. So what do I mean? So I mean, instead of using the term believer and unbeliever, don't use that terminology. Use Christian, non-Christian. What is a Christian? A follower of Jesus, right? We need to define it more than that, but that's part of it. Because if I just say a follower of Jesus, well, then a Mormon's going to say, well, I'm a Christian too, right? No, you're not. So we do need to go deeper than that. But what I mean is just try and make sure that we be careful with the words that we use when we're talking to non-Christians. Don't use the term believer, unbeliever. You can use the term beliefs. Don't use the word doctrines. People don't know what doctrines mean, so use the term beliefs or use the term convictions. That's just going to help in your conversations, using terms that non-Christians would typically understand. Or if you're going to use Christian terms, define what you mean. The power of so. All right, I've told you guys my daughter has been asking me lots of questions. She's been asking me why about everything. Why do I need to brush my teeth? Why do I need to go to bed? Why can't I stay up? Why? Well, here are 3 words that you need to remember. So, why, and really. Oops. These 3 words can turn into questions that are powerful. So what? What do you mean, right? So what, when you ask the word so, you're asking them to tell you why is that relevant to the conversation. You're asking them to explain how it fits in, how it fits into the discussion, how it makes sense. Why? You're asking them for reasons. Really? You're getting clarification. Is that really what you believe? And it's also, you can also do it with a incredulous stare. Really? You think that there is no such thing? You don't think there is anything that exists? There's no matter? Really? You see what I'm doing? I guess it is kind of condescending, isn't it? But in some sense, I'm kind of like, really? You really believe that? Right? And maybe that will help give them the verbal cues that they need to question what they believe. All right, guys. So tools, we're going to cover that when we get to our conversations about apologetics. And then the Ambassador's Creed, I put that in there for you to read over for homework. We're going to close. We're done. And then we'll meet back the next 30 minutes. We're going to just practice. No more lecture. Okay? All right, guys. Let's have a short 5-minute break.